Putin bad news? Should we be rooting for a coup against Putin? Over drinks the other week, a friend asked why one of the Kremlin insiders, known in Russia as the Siloviki, or men of strength, doesn't just do in Vladimir Putin. You have a valid concern. The invasion of Ukraine is believed by some to be a strategic disaster that threatens the survival of the regime and their illicit wealth. Putin's close associates would make sense to plot his ouster from office or even his demise. Recent claims from a defector suggest Putin is just as worried about this possibility, as they claim he has become even more paranoid. Some experts in the field of international relations and security have essentially begun taking bets on how long Vladimir Putin will remain in power. Politico has ranked the possible next presidents. The answers may seem obvious at first glance, but digging deeper into the question reveals interesting details about our misunderstandings, the extent to which the current conflict threatens the regime, and the historical dynamics of Russian coups d'état. The potential consequences and outcomes are also brought into sharp focus. The next logical inquiry is this result desirable? Knowing the answers to these questions will help us plan for the Kremlin's future without Putin. Misunderstandings of Russian politics and power struggles under Putin have informed our view of a potential doing in of Putin. Our perception of the Kremlin has been tainted by the long list of poisonings and mysterious deaths. The high number of deaths by suicide by falling has prompted macabre jokes about Russia's epidemic of window cancer. While these incidents certainly grab attention, they are hardly indicative of the norm in Russia's political power struggles. The deaths of most Kremlin insiders have more likely been the result of personal business vendettas than of elite-sanctioned campaigns. They are marginalized to the point of insignificance, and the law is sometimes used as a weapon to ruin their lives financially and/or put them behind bars. As a result of the actions of military strongmen in the 20th century, the idea of a military coup in Russia to depose Putin has gained traction. However, this discounting of Russia's past is incorrect. Looking back at their history, Russians have always played second fiddle to political initiatives. However, there is evidence to suggest that the Siloviki are split between those who are fully supportive of the conflict and those who disapprove but accept that there is no going back. There are no political leaders who are likely to take action, so the military has no one to lead. As the Kremlin faces international isolation and economic sanctions, some argue that public discontent will grow to the point where the Siloviki will remove Putin from power. There is little evidence to suggest that the sanctions pose a direct threat to the regime's ability to maintain its repressive apparatus, but they will contribute to Russia's long-term decline nonetheless. This means that the regime and its stakeholders can feel safe despite the inevitable decline in living standards. North Korea and Iran are the original practitioners of what Anne Applebaum calls the Maduro model, after Venezuela's current dictator. They can all serve as models for the Kremlin. Despite being under economic pressure for much longer than Moscow, both Pyongyang and Tehran have managed to maintain their status as strong regional and global powers. Analysts have already begun to label Russia with comparisons to North Korea and Orthodox Iran. The security apparatus is like a hydra, making it difficult for even Siloviki insiders to take it down and get rid of Putin. The FSB is an integral part of the armed forces and is responsible for counterintelligence and domestic security. The purpose of the National Guard, or Rosgvardia, was to quell domestic unrest without resorting to the armed forces. The FSO's secondary role is that of ensuring the safety of the personnel. The GRU, the military's own intelligence agency, works in tandem with the FSB to protect the Kremlin. They are all keeping an eye on one another. Because of this dispersion, no single security agency can become a serious threat. It makes people wary of one another and provides a lot of chances to be exposed. What Putin proposes is a system of checks and balances. These are significant roadblocks on the way to Putin's ouster. But even if they were eliminated, there are still three arguments against having him removed by force. The most immediate threat is destabilization within Russia as a result of the repercussions. It's not that Russia is going to fall apart completely, but some observers have drawn comparisons to the 1990s, when organized crime, ethnic strife, and crony capitalism swept the country. If this happens again, it could lead to the spread of nuclear weapons and materials and provide fertile ground for violent extremist groups. Afghanistan's branch of the so-called Islamic State has reportedly been spreading propaganda among Muslims in Russia's border republics, encouraging them to take advantage of the Kremlin's isolation and rise up. Second, the Allies allegedly decided against killing Adolf Hitler because doing so would have increased Nazi Germany's chances of winning the war or extending it because Hitler was making such crucial strategic mistakes. Putin is a good example of how this thinking works. According to early reports, he has been micromanaging his special military operation in the Ukraine conflict despite having no prior military experience. To maintain his authority, he has also encouraged factionalism among the ruling elite. He has avoided making tough choices, like a general mobilization, that would benefit the war effort but hurt his popularity. Putin has been mocked as Russia's unique strategic advantage by prominent nationalist blogger Igor Girkin, a former militia leader. So, Putin staying in power can be seen as beneficial, albeit unpleasant. Russia's status as a nuclear power, some would argue, alters this assessment. Putin, however, has shown restraint in actual nuclear posturing despite his threats. This indicates that he is keeping some semblance of reason despite knowing that the costs are much higher than the benefits. Taking him out of the picture could cause more instability, which could lead to a nuclear war. The replacement for him, especially if they are more radical or feel the need to project strength and resolve, could be a disaster. The third and final reason to be skeptical of a coup is that the threat we face is not Putin personally but rather Putin's entire system. All significant positions of power are occupied by people with an interest in maintaining the status quo, some of whom see anti-Western sentiment as a means to maintain their own power. Therefore, Putin's successor is likely to continue the same policies. Because they are products of a system that has encouraged corruption, anti-Western sentiment, and conspiracy theories, a new generation taking power could make things even worse. As a former KGB figure, the old guard KGB and their associates naturally assumed that Putin shared their values when they helped propel him to power. However, they grossly underappreciated the fact that Putin and his St. Petersburg gang adhered to a different set of values. They were a new generation who blamed the men who were now aiding their rise for the paralysis of power that they believed had destroyed Russia's geopolitical importance. That's why they weren't loyal to their customers. Similarly, the West misunderstood Putin's rejection of the old guard as evidence of his commitment to the new international system and failed to address the underlying causes of the deterioration of relations between the West and the Kremlin. If Putin were to be removed from power, the same mistakes could be repeated. One of the main obstacles to solving these issues is that the Kremlin is broadcasting them, likely to dissuade the idea of completely defeating Russia in Ukraine and humiliating Putin. Our enemies may be taking advantage of our worries, but that doesn't mean we should ignore them. Even if Putin were to be removed from office, relations between the West and Russia would not immediately improve. This calls for a bottom-up strategy, one that gives voice to dissenters while also bridging the information gap between Western and Russian citizens. So far, we have the Call Russia project and the Finnish practice of planting news stories within online games to thank for our understanding of this phenomenon. The scope and message of such initiatives need to be widened. It is important to remind Russians of what they have lost as much as it is to inform them of the actual events in Ukraine. Russia is no longer a world power to be reckoned with. Rather, it is a global pariah, kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party. The Soviet Union's triumph over Nazism is now celebrated as a national cult. The Kremlin's weaponization of cultural exchanges for influence building has tainted even Russian art, music, and literature. These are the symbolic heartlands of Russian identity that cross party lines and can be reclaimed only by Russians. Rather than looking for a quick fix, the Western public and policymakers should brace themselves for a long campaign.